On the night of October 29th, Ukrainian defense forces struck two Russian oil refineries, Novospassky in the Ulyanovsk region and Maritsky in the Republic of Mari El. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, explosions and fires were recorded at both sites. The Budyonovsky gas processing plant in the Stavropol region was also hit. A production unit there was damaged. These facilities have been put out of operation. This effectively means a reduction in the capabilities of the Russian army in the war against Ukraine.
Shares of Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil are plummeting. New U.S. restrictions are hitting Russia's main sources of income. Losses exceed $11 billion in just a few days. The 19th package of EU sanctions has also come into effect. How this affects the Kremlin's economy and whether it will force Putin to seek a path to negotiations. More in the report by Dimitros Shulha.
A political signal and economic pressure. That's how experts describe Donald Trump's new sanctions. They are aimed at Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. According to Reuters, the restrictions are already having consequences. Greek tanker companies, which transport about a third of Russian oil, have started refusing to work with Russian suppliers. Moscow publicly claims that these sanctions will not cause it any real harm.
All right. I'm glad he thinks so. That's good. I'll let you know about it in 6 months. We'll see how it plays out in the end.
The downward trend of Russian stock markets is already noticeable.
The effect is already immediate. $5.2 billion is the loss these two companies have suffered in just 2 days, because the sanctions have been imposed not only against them, but also, if I'm not mistaken, against 34 subsidiaries, 28 of Rosneft and I believe 6 of Lukoil.
Overall, at this point, Lukoil's shares have dropped by almost 18%. Together with Rosneft, the companies have lost over $11 billion. The Ukrainian president's commissioner for sanctions policy, Vladislav Vlazuk, predicts that Russian oil exports will be cut by more than half.
This potentially means around $100 billion a year in lost revenue. We expect that, provided the relevant sanctions restrictions are properly enforced, Russia will lose at least 60 to 70% of its oil exports to both India and China.
According to Lyudmila Pokrovchuk, enforcement of the sanctions will primarily take place in Asian countries. She says that some companies are already refusing contracts.
We even know of statements from state-owned enterprises in China where they have suspended imports of Russian oil specifically by sea. And I should note that was a very large amount. It was still about 1.4 million cubic meters per day. India as well. Currently, it is reviewing and diversifying its markets, shifting them towards Iraq and Qatar.
The Indian holding company Reliance Industries has announced that it is refusing to make further purchases of Russian oil.
This Indian company is the leading private oil importer owned by India's richest businessman, Ambani. They had already said so, and at the end of last year, they signed an agreement with Rosneft for the supply of 500,000 barrels of oil per day. Now, as they say, they're starting to wonder whether it's worth staying in this contract.
At a time when companies are refusing Russian oil, other countries are declaring their readiness to replace these volumes.
Kuwait has announced that it will be ready to supply. The United Arab Emirates, they have an unused quota. Other countries as well, so the potential is sufficient.
Analysts say that sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil are just the beginning. Meanwhile, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker stated that Washington wants to bring Putin to the negotiating table and did not rule out new restrictions.
President Trump holds all the cards, and this is just one of them that he is playing. There are many others as well.
Ukrainian analysts predict that the U.S. may designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, which would make bank transfers impossible.
This would mean that all banks around the world, regardless of which country they are in, would effectively blacklist any Russian counterparties, whether they are legal entities or individuals, and would generally not want to do business or engage in any transactions with them.
Ivan Az notes that about 75% of global transactions are conducted in dollars and euros. Switching to another currency, particularly the yuan, is difficult for Russia.
It is not a freely convertible currency. And secondly, China doesn't really like it when its currency, particularly the Chinese yuan, leaves the country. The same goes for India.
After Trump's sanctions, the EU approved the 19th package of restrictions against Russia. It bans the import of Russian liquefied natural gas.
Now there are specific dates. In 2027, they will stop using LNG, and in 2028, they will completely abandon all options, primarily Russian pipeline gas.
The decision applies to all exports of Russian gas, both pipeline and liquefied. European companies were given not the expected 2 years, but only 1 year to complete their current contracts.
Total Energies in France, Eni in Italy, and also Safe in Germany supply Russian liquefied gas. They are still supplying, so they must complete or terminate these contracts by January 1st, 2027.
The EU has also imposed a complete ban on any transactions with two major Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Gazprom Neft. At the same time, additional sanctions were imposed against the Russian shadow fleet.
Europe has sanctioned another 117 tankers that transport grey Russian oil. But unfortunately, there are already 588 of them now. And unfortunately, there are actually 1,400 of these tankers, and their number keeps growing.
A number of Russian diplomats currently in Europe have also come under sanctions. Financial transactions with Russian banks and organizations connected to the payment systems of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation have also been restricted.
Sanctions have been imposed on banks such as Alpha Bank, a major bank that has come under these measures, as well as on Polyus Gold, meaning companies involved in the trade of precious metals and gemstones.
There are also additional financial restrictions. This is, again, a ban on transactions with certain banks. Banks in Belarus and Kazakhstan have also been sanctioned. Sanctions have been imposed on banks, traders, and crypto exchanges. In a number of countries that were, let's say, processing Russian funds, for example, the United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, and Kyrgyzstan.
Svitlana Romanenko emphasizes, due to the ban on gas exports, Russia's production capacity is decreasing, and the aggressor country will lose about $29 billion next year.
These 29 billion are equivalent to 900,000 Shahid-type drones. This has been calculated, so we understand how many drones Russia will not be able to produce.
Experts emphasize, due to economic pressure, Russia will have to cut state programs and shift expenses onto its own citizens.
This could mean higher taxes. This will happen starting January 1st, 2022. This is the expropriation of money from bank accounts from 56 to 70 trillion rubles, and this means unpaid pensions, which propaganda in the face of Maidan talks about. It also means cuts to salaries and pensions.
There are not enough resources to pay contract soldiers, so they will start mobilization. Mobilization will already create chaos for them, and they won't be able to handle it. That's half a year, well, maybe sooner.
According to experts, while Moscow tries to downplay the effects of sanctions, its economy is gradually losing its main source of income and the ability to finance the war. And this very thing might force Putin to finally sit down at the negotiating table. Dimitro Shula, Rada TV channel, for the summary program United Main.